to the latest installment of the ECAC Empowerment Series of panel discussions. We're taking these virtual now, and we're excited about that. This one is on mental health issues facing college athletes. My name is Dan Coonan. I'm commissioner of the ECAC. This is co-sponsored by the Sports Business Institute and Dave Toromio, who is with us. Yeah, we're thrilled to be putting on this. We're excited about our panel today. If by the way, if you're not a panelist, please keep your audio on mute. And if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. I want to start today just by having our panelists give a real brief bio description, and then we'll get into defining the problem. So Dr. Tom, why don't you start out?
Well, thanks for the invite, everybody. I'm glad to be with you virtually here today. I'm Tom Golightly. I'm the Assistant Director of Athletics at Brigham Young University in our Counseling and Psychological Services. Essentially, I'm in charge of managing a team of clinicians that work with all of our student athletes on mental health and performance issues. I did my undergraduate at the University of Arizona, my PhD here at BYU, and spent some time at Texas A&M and Texas Tech universities in similar positions to the one that I'm in now. I've been involved nationally with the NCAA mental health think tank, and recently as well as an advisory board member for the Clinical Counseling Sports Psychology Association. So I like to keep my finger on the pulse of national trends, not just what's going on here locally. I also, on a personal note, recently found out that I love virtual vacations, especially the long walks on the beach that people show, and endless numbers of Zoom encounters. So I've enjoyed the COVID life, I guess, living virtually. So that's me in a brief nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. We also have our all-star ECAC panelist, Ivy Watts, back for this panel. I would just give a brief description of your bio.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to see so many people on here. My name is Ivy Watts, and I'm a mental health empowerment speaker, so I'll share more as we go through, but I share my story of my struggle as a student athlete that looks like I had it all together and was All-American and Woman of the Year for my conference and for the NCAA, but was really struggling in silence with my mental health, and sharing my story to empower student athletes and coaches and administrators to know that you're not alone and that you have a voice to get help that you deserve. I graduated from University of New Haven, and I ran track there. Excited to be here.
Thanks for being back with us. I got the opportunity to work with Saucedo when I was an athletic director at Santa Clara. He did a great job with athletes, mental training. Adam, you want to just give a brief description of your bio?
Yes, thank you, Dan. So my name is Adam Saucedo, and I'm a mindset coach. And so what that really looks like, I wear different hats every day, but I'm working with teams and individual athletes and clients to help them find their peak performance. And so this is going to be different for each client, looking at different domains from sports to personal life to social life. And so to be able to help kind of take a holistic viewpoint of performance, to be able to help them start to empower themselves with different tools and even mindset habits that can allow them to be able to find their best in multiple domains of their life, so that ultimately they can be able to really be at their best in those responsibilities and activities, hopefully on the field or on the course, that allow them to really find that satisfaction personally. And so my work has really shifted over the years. I really started working with sports and working with fitness athletes, but it's really shifted into working in the corporate space as well. I'm out here in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley, so I have a lot of tech startups and other companies that I work with. I'm really helping with professional development. And so this has really been tying this whole performance training and peak performance training for me, and seeing these ties of how to be at your best no matter what the circumstance is, and really empowering people to really start to understand their mindset, their emotional state from moment to moment, and really instilling stronger mindfulness so that they can be able to manage the highs and lows that is thrown to them in each one of their performance domains. For me, working at Santa Clara was one of the first places that I started. That was my alma mater, got my psychology degree there, got my master's in sports psychology. And 10 years later, I have my practice now working all over the country with clients and athletes virtually, which has been amazing. I had to make that pivot, obviously, as many of us in March. But being able to see that people are really still seeking this information and really looking to better themselves, even in this kind of challenging time that we're all finding ourselves in. For me, I've seen myself as a change agent and really helping instill cultural change for different programs and institutions. So for me, it's working at the individual level, but also at the team and organizational level to really help promote mental health and wellness, and really helping people to understand how to really define where their own focus and goals are for their future. So hopefully that's a quick start, but we'll dive into some other areas that I focus on with Santa Clara University, with San Jose State University here in the Bay Area, but also beyond. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us, Adam. And we're thrilled to have Dr. Eric here with us, Dr. Eric Marginal. And he's got about as unique a bio as anyone working in athletics, and to talk about wearing several hats. But Dr. Eric, you want to just give, I think you're still on mute, but we want to give a quick summary before we kickstart, a quick summary of your bio. I think you're still on mute, Dr. Eric.
Yep, now, there we go. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fine. Well, it's quite a lineup to follow. Very impressive people that we have involved today. But just briefly, I began my mental health career, so to speak, after I got my doctorate at NYU. And for the first 20 years or so, was primarily just a psychologist and psychotherapist, not just, but that's what I focused on, with a specific attention to substance abuse and alcoholism. In 1985, I had the opportunity to become involved in minor league baseball, and bought my first minor league baseball team, which coincidentally led me into contact with major league personnel. And when they discovered that I was a psychologist, even though sports psychology was in its infancy back in the 80s, they jumped on it, and I began working with first the Pittsburgh Pirates, then the Cincinnati Reds, the Chicago White Sox, and ultimately with the New York Yankees as their sports psychologist. In addition to that, I also began working with individual athletes, golfers, tennis players, weightlifters, and other individual athletes as well. And also worked with the New Jersey Nets and the Golden State Warriors. So I've had some experience both with teams and with individuals. Most of my work with the teams varied between performance enhancement stuff, which was new stuff back in those days. You know, remember fondly being in the Yankees clubhouse, talking with one of their well-known hitters, who told me he don't need no damn psychologist to hit a ball. And from there, it was quite a journey trying to not only treat people, but what became kind of my secondary adjunct to that, which was educating people about psychology and sports psychology specifically. So at this point, now I've had these two kind of parallel careers, both of which I still pursue, albeit on a less full schedule than I used to, but I enjoy the diversity of it. I don't like working virtually. I'll be the first to admit that, even though it saves me time and commuting and expense, but something gets lost. But nevertheless, there is still value there. It's important for us to be reaching out to people and be accessible to people. And I love that I can just still have an impact on some of these young athletes and students.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I just love that we have 4 panelists who all touched this issue of mental health for student athletes at different places on the spectrum. And I think that's great. But I want to spend a few minutes defining the problem. What are we seeing today that may be pandemic related or not in terms of mental health issues and challenges for student athletes in college? I know Dr. Tom, you're on a campus, so maybe if you want to just kickstart that, what if you want to define the problem that we're seeing right now?
Well, I would say it begins pre-COVID and all of the social distancing measures that we've taken as a society. Back in 2016, the National Institute of Health conducted a survey. They do that pretty regularly with college students, but what made this one a little bit different is they actually kind of subgrouped student athletes away and wanted to compare that subpopulation to other college student populations. And what we found was about 30% of student athletes were reporting being consistently overwhelmed, meaning a third of all of our student athletes were reporting near or at or currently experiencing an anxiety disorder. 73% thought their coaches wanted what was best for them. And a lot of them still didn't know where to point them, depending on the resources available at the institution. 25% of, or 1/4 of student athletes reported extreme exhaustion from their role as student athlete. So we can expect in an athletic department of say 800 student athletes, 200 of them are exhausted at a point that puts them at risk, not just mental health risk, but risk for injury, risk for academic risk, lots of different measures that are there. And that was pre-COVID. And since anecdotally, I could probably get up and see 15 clients a day. Now, Dr. Eric would be like, don't do that, right? But it's I could work 6 to 7 days a week and see just people all day. The demand is incredible, and the difficulties with virtual connection are there. But I can anticipate if we redid that survey 2020 style, those numbers would be incredibly high, exponentially higher than that 30%, 25%. And that's basically what we're seeing on our campus with our student athletes right now. And talking with my colleagues across the country, we're not unique here at BYU. That's happening at every institution that's kind of starting to track this stuff.
And not every campus is fortunate enough to have someone like yourself, Dr. Tom, there addressing these issues. How about the other panelists in terms of defining this problem, what we're seeing? Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Thank you, Tom, for sharing. So I completely agree. I think the pressures that come along with being a student athlete were very much apparent before COVID was even a thing that caused a lot of that stress and exhaustion that Tom was talking about. And then COVID came and just took away so much, and those pressures and expectations are still there. Maybe they're coming less from external sources, but being a student athlete like myself, who just put so much pressure on myself and really needed the world to see me as perfect, I can imagine the pressure and expectations that are still there for those students who are putting it on themselves. And so it creates a lot of spaces for anxiety, the loss of not having your sport. For so many student athletes, their sport is their coping mechanism. And so to not have that on a day-to-day basis or to have it in a different capacity can be causing a lot of loss around meaning, connection, belonging, or even their sense of identity if their entire identity was being an athlete. So I think it's a really incredibly difficult time from a student athlete perspective, and also acknowledging that coaches and administrators are also struggling and have lost a lot. And we're not expecting to be dealing with this in December of 2020. They're getting ready for winter sports and thinking about their spring sports. And there's just so much uncertainty that comes along with that I think just everyone is really struggling with that loss. And without having some of those proper coping mechanisms, it's not always the healthiest situation. So definitely, I think it's created a much tougher experience for student athletes and coaches and administrators alike.
Right. Thank you, Ivy. Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback really quickly off of that. I agree wholeheartedly that stress and energy management is probably one of the bigger topics that I discuss with my clients, and really stemming from the expectations that they're placing either on themselves or those external expectations like we've discussed from parents and coaches, administrators. So to be able to understand that, yes, this has been a pervasive challenge for many, many years, and maybe has just been exacerbated over the last 8 months. But once again, this idea of stress and energy management leading to potential challenges with motivation, focus, and concentration, and even this idea of self-confidence when they're unable to find that extra gear each day and they're unable to tap into that well, they're finding themselves not being able to perform at that peak performance from day to day, and that can really impact overall self-confidence. And for me, these are things that, once again, were pervasive beforehand, but as we've been talking about, they've all just been amplified over the last few months. And so to be able to, once again, provide opportunities for education and resources for these student athletes and the coaching staff and the administrator is critical at this time, in my opinion, because this is uncharted territory and we are all facing some level of a mental and emotional fatigue at this point. So to be able to find ways, once again, to be able to identify what's going on so that we can then be able to proactively take action towards promoting recovery and promoting these other options for learning and ultimately for building better habits.
Great. Thank you, Adam.
Dan, can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Kind of piggybacking again off of those two comments, which were great. One of the other struggles that I think we face as people that are trying to provide the helps and the resources is some of the barriers that exist to going and seeking help. And it's worth kind of mentioning these things as we're presenting the problem. And as Adam mentioned, there's this mentality, right? And this battle through mentality. And I come from an athletics background myself, and I remember the tough it out thing, and it makes me, feel like I perform better. But it also can be that mentality that keeps me from going and seeking help when I really, really need it. And that athletics culture, the team cultures, even the subcultures on the teams, kind of like, you don't need that necessarily. Kind of Dr. Eric mentioned that. I don't need a psychologist to help me hit a damn ball, right? Like that culture of having to overcome those barriers, as well as the stigma that exists kind of everywhere, a lack of understanding of what therapy looks like, and just the schedule of being a student athlete. Those are big barriers and hurdles that we have to kind of get over as we try to lay out this problem and why some of those resources need to exist the way that they're starting to.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Eric,
if I could just jump in there and piggyback a little bit on what Tom just said. For me, the issue is the outreach, so to speak. I see it in my classes, for example. In addition to Manhattanville, I also teach at Seton Hall, where I'm teaching undergraduate, and several of them are student athletes. And the problem is not so much with those who are taking a course in sports psychology or who have that inclination to explore and to seek help and whatever. The problem is reaching those who don't have that awareness. And so I think it's really important that we be exploring mechanisms for reaching our student athletes, ones who don't have structural access to it, but are just kind of floating out there. And whether it's encouraging the student athletes who we are in touch with, or getting to the coaches and administrators, we've got to be more proactive in terms of reaching out to these.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to have each of you now just take a few moments to describe how you're addressing these issues in your role, how you're tackling personally this and what you're doing for it, and talk about that if you would. And I guess we'll start with Dr. Tom again, if you don't mind. You touched on it a little bit, but.
I think one of the big things is if we talk about distress existing on a continuum, and every student having some distress, whether you're a student athlete or not, my job primarily is to meet people that have met a certain threshold of distress, that they're experiencing clinical conditions, whether that's a mood disorder, an anxiety disorder, relationship struggles. That's where we jump in with our individual treatment. And along with that is going to be obviously performance issues. Just as Dr. Eric was talking about, if you do good work with your individuals, it's going to spread. And it's interesting to see how that kind of gets filtered. When I started here at BYU, we had someone in a position that really kind of struggled to connect, and there were only 2 student athletes receiving services. This was about 10 years ago. Now we have well over 200 athletes seeking services every year. So we hit about 1 out of every 3 student athletes at BYU. It helps that we're licensed, we're clinically trained, but also that we have experiences. All of our counselors have experiences with student athletes and or sport performance in general. And I think those 2 components are really, really important as administrators, as coaches, know who you're pointing your student athletes to, that you know their background, you know their training, and you're comfortable with the experiences that they're going to have, because you do have some psychologists that might say, wow, just take away sport. Well, they clearly don't understand the identity component and the development and some of the differences related to this. I think the big thing for someone in our role is to be visible and to be available. And that visibility means going out and being at practice and showing up, and they know who you are. You're integrated into that team culture. We meet with every team at the start of every season, and we meet with every incoming freshman and every incoming transfer student. So they know who we are as team psychologists or team counselors, and they know where you can go, or where one can go if one is struggling. But that access is very important. So administrators and coaches can provide that access, and that's very key for someone feeling comfortable and make that connection. I'm noticing some stuff in the chat, which I'm not reading because I'm talking, but I'll try to read those and address those here in a minute. But I think another big key that we have is prevention. We don't want to necessarily just have them get to therapy, but what can we do before they need that? And the NCAA has provided some really good information on that. The Sports Science Institute over the last 10 years or so has provided some great materials that are at your disposal. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But you know, it's really important then that we kind of try to do things in sport culture and team cultures, but then also get them the help that they need. And it is important that psychotherapists keep in mind who they're seeing, in that they're not taking away a competitive advantage. I know that I get a lot of heat from my colleagues. I'm a competitive SOB. I played sports, I love them. And when I'm in therapy, I don't want to take away that competitive edge, but I do want them to be more mindful and more present with their performances. And I think that's a big component. I think Adam kind of hit on that when he's talking about holistic approach to performance and treating the whole individual and getting the whole individual to engage that performance, not just aspects of that individual. So we're really working towards those ends at BYU, and I'm really interested in hearing from others and where they're at kind of on the spectrum of things.
So you think your presence and all of that focus, being in front of the student athletes in general, has taken away some of that stigma that would be normally attached to coming forward and trying to advocate for yourself?
Yes, and I think even just the presence of being there helps people kind of recognize, hey, I do have parts of myself that I can tap into. I think one of the things that athletes are finding is some of those mentally tough strategies that work maybe in the performance arena are running them into problems off of it. but it's okay to turn both on. They're both not bad things. They're both good things. And do we just know when to employ it? Anything that we do that's good, if we overuse it, is going to become a fault. And so recognizing like, hey, here's my time to kind of do these things, and here's my time to kind of do these things. And you have different tools in the toolbox for different problems, and we can solve those problems. It's just helping the student be self-aware and know when to engage those things. But just me even being present, just walking through a practice sometimes. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes. I don't need to stand on the sideline and watch for hours. It's just showing up and, giving some fist bumps. Not right now, but in normal times, and just showing up and talking with the trainers and waving to the coaches and passing by in the hallway even when they're in their offices and just asking them how they're doing. Those are really, really important things to show, yes, I'm invested in your team culture, and I want to be a part of whatever you're trying to do with your program. I'm bought in, and I'm not going to be the one to tell you what your program needs to look like, but I am a support to you as you try to create the culture that you're looking for.
Great. Thank you very much. Ivy, you want to describe how these issues manifest themselves in all that you're doing and how you tend to attack them?
Yeah, definitely. I think that stigma piece is one of the biggest parts of my work, because I grew up believing all of the stigma around mental health, especially growing up in a Black family where the stigma is even more heightened around mental health. I really believed that if you struggled, that meant that you were crazy, or that getting help was a sign of weakness. And for me, when I was finally able to get that help, I wanted to figure out how I could help other student athletes who felt like me, who either looked like they had it all together and were struggling, or were just struggling in general and didn't feel like they had someone to turn to. And my goal is to really help student athletes feel less alone in what they're going through. There's been so many times after presentations that I share my story and I provide tools that students will say, like, I never knew anyone else that looked like me or had similar experiences as me also struggled. And now I feel like I can go get that help at the counseling center, or go tell my coach, go tell my parent that I'm struggling. And so I'm serving kind of as that bridge. I'm not professional help, but I'm providing that opportunity for student athletes to know that they have a voice, and that talking about their mental health is not shameful. It's not a sign of weakness, but it is a sign of strength. It's a sign of them recognizing that they want more for themselves, and that it's okay to ask for help, and that there's resources to do that. So I'm providing tools around self-care and mental wellness that they can do on and off the field. I'm providing resources, maybe not always campus-specific resources, but really pointing them in those directions and knowing that there's even resources at their fingertips. So things like the crisis text line, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. There's some apps called like My3, which you can have like different people you can contact if you're struggling. And so all these different ways to just feel like they can talk about what they're going through, and recognize that just by getting some of those things off their chest that just feel really heavy, that can be a really great form of healing. I also talk about just the power of positivity, and I know a couple of people on here have seen my presentations before, so at the end we're chanting positive affirmations, because I'm a huge advocate of self-love, and I think that learning to love yourself carries into everything else that you're doing. And when we can start practicing, I see the thumbs up, when we can start practicing self-love and having that positivity for ourselves, it does impact how we carry ourselves, and then ultimately what comes to us, and that can impact our performance on the field, at a test, at a conversation that we're having. So we really practice the power of affirmations, and I do that in every single presentation, because I truly believe that when we start sending our brain those messages, it makes a difference in what happens in our world. And then I also provide messages to coaches and administrators as well, to also help them to feel less alone, because their mental health matters too, and have to be able to take care of themselves before they can ever take care of anyone else, whether that's a student athlete, a child, or a colleague, or a friend. And so we focus a lot on that and their self-care and their mental wellness, and also providing tools for what they can do in COVID virtual times, in-person times, to help to reduce that stigma. create a mentally well inclusive culture around mental health, and to really provide that space where their student athletes feel like they can come to them to have conversations around their mental health. So the real goal is to break down that stigma and ultimately just to help people know the power of self-love, mental wellness, and that they have a voice and that they can get the help that they deserve.
Great, thank you so much. And by the way, both Dr. Tom and Ivy mentioned different resources. We'll accumulate those. I'll put them on my LinkedIn. We'll put them on ECAC's LinkedIn. We'll put them on our website as well. And maybe we'll even email them out to the email addresses that we got from this. But I appreciate that because you go through quickly, and we will definitely cover that, and I'll do that today. Adam, you want to talk about how you're touching this issue, how it arises in what you do, and how you're dealing with it?
Definitely. So I'm very similar to Ivy in the fact that, being able to be this bridge or this go-between between the athletes and the resources that are available to them. And so when I approach my teams or my clients, I really make sure that they understand that, once again, I'm here to complement and support their coaching staff or their program, and that ultimately this is going to be a process that we're going to have to customize as we go through the season, because every single year is a little bit different. And so those needs are going to have to be presented early on for us to be able to really create a plan of action that's going to be ideal for that group. And so what that really looks like on a daily basis is doing individual consultation. So having individual sessions virtually now, but before it was on campus with my clients, and really allowing a space for these athletes to reflect and really start to identify how they can start to perform better, and really giving them a space to be able to, once again, identify what their thought patterns look like, what their emotional states look like from moment to moment, so that they can be able to start to empower themselves over the certain habits that really are going to allow them to have that peak performance consistently and sustainably. So that's going to be from kind of the individual standpoint, really having these one-on-one sessions, providing them with those individual tools. Then at the next level, we're looking at the team performance and really helping create a positive high performance culture where from the top to bottom, we have buy-in, and we really allow them to have a voice that's outside of the coaching staff, where they're starting to lead this. I'm obviously helping shape that meeting, but at the end of the day, these are the athletes really starting to identify how they can start to perform better, how their communication skills can be enhanced, and ultimately how their problem-solving skills can be exercised in the heat of the moment when we need it the most. So really being able to provide, once again, a space for them to have a dialogue, for them to be able to start to talk about different challenges and successes that they're having from week to week, so that we can start taking stronger ownership over these different performances, and really start to really create an environment for learning integration to occur from week to week. So that has been something that I really love, is having these team sessions, because ultimately it just provides another space, another outlet for them to start thinking and talking about these things in real time, versus just being able to have maybe a one-off session, or even just to be able to learn about these things maybe in a one-off seminar. So having this consistency, I see, is really critical, because from week to week, things can change. And so to be able to have them have a space to be able to discuss these things and actively work through them as a group is really cool to see. It really enhances team cohesion, in my opinion. And then finally, I also work with the captains and leadership on teams. So this could be the actual team captains that have been chosen by the coaching staff, or this actually can be coaches and the key team captains, and really bringing a collaborative team effort to really help the leadership all be on the same page, and really making sure that the same messaging is being disseminated from the top down to the bottom. So that really allows these emerging leaders to have a space to start to identify their own leadership development skills, and being able to, once again, work off each other and have this peer-to-peer discussion to be able to start to learn how to be able to enhance their leadership qualities. So that's been really fruitful. That was actually something that Dan and I were able to really create and establish at Santa Clara University. We created this Bronco leadership program where we had different speakers come in and really created an environment for all student athletes across all 20 sports. I believe we had 2 to 3 representatives come in and really start to talk across sport lines. And that was the first time that I saw baseball talk with women's soccer, and then women's soccer learning from tennis. And we saw this collaborative effort for the first time and started to break down some of these stigmas that maybe we thought was solely within my sport, and starting to see that, wow, baseball had the same issues as soccer women, and soccer women still had the same issues as my track athletes. And that really started to break down some of these walls and barriers. And I felt like that was one of those opportunities that was a once in a lifetime experience for us to be able to bring this in where there was nothing established at that point. And we had the chance to really create this environment and really, once again, create a stronger culture around just talking about the different leadership challenges and mental challenges that we see from day to day. So that was really amazing. And so ultimately, as we talked about, and as Tom mentioned too, this kind of holistic approach, because at the end of the day, we're a human performer. And so to be able to understand which performance habits allow me to perform at my best, not just on the field, but also in the classroom, in my personal life, and those relationships that I have, it's really helping them find those repetition and consistency outside of their sport life so that they can feel confident being able to execute these as their default responses in their sport experiences. So that is pretty much what I do from day to day, is really presenting these learning tools, these opportunities for people to reflect and really integrate the learning from day to day so they can feel empowered to be able to really feel like they're enhancing their ability from week to week, and feeling like even if they're in a performance slump, there's always an opportunity to enhance the mindset, or even just to have that stronger belief in yourself to be able to overcome some of these lulls in our performance.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, that was a great leadership program that you helped put together for us at Santa Clara. Absolutely. By the way, both Dr. Tom and Ivy, I think, have placed in the chat links to the website and the phone numbers that they were referring to. They're, of course, one step ahead of me, which is not all that hard, by the way. But thank you guys both for doing that. We'll still accumulate all those and get them together as well at the end also, but thanks for doing that. Dr. Eric, why don't you talk about how you're plugging in to this issue and what you see and what you're doing?
Well, I think listening to Adam and Tom and Ivy talk, one of the things that strikes me is that with regard to the issue of identity and how important it is to the student athlete, I think what the practitioner has to be involved with, and I'm now talking about it from that particular hat, that there's a balance that has to be struck between, on the one hand, the specialness of their identity and how important it is to them, but also at the same time, kind of paradoxically, the ordinariness, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. In that, yes, they're special in this particular area that's important to them, but they're also like everybody else. The worker who is passionate about his work in some other area, who is being deprived of participating in doing what he wants to do. So it's striking that balance for the athlete and making him, on the one hand, building up his self-esteem and his specialness, but also at the same time making him understand, and it goes to the whole issue of stigma that we've been talking about, that he's like everybody else, that we all struggle with these kinds of battles, and we need to be mindful of it. The other thing that I wanted to elaborate on a little more was Tom's point about his visibility, and I find that to be really important when I'm working with athletes and student athletes, that I'm around and I'm there, and not only am I there as a sign of support for my athlete, my student athlete, but I'm also visible to the other people in the building, the other people on the team, the other people who are there. And often that is one of the most effective ways of being able to outreach, because invariably, if I'm at a game that an athlete's in, and I talk with him, I can't tell you how often somebody else on the team will come up to that athlete and say, "Hey, who's that guy who you were talking to?" You know, and that opens the door for the athlete to say, "Well, he's somebody who I'm working with, and he's helping me with X, Y, or Z, and you know, maybe you ought to check him out. You know, he's easy to talk to, he's available, non-judgmental. You know, try it out." And so I find that availability and accessibility is very important when we go through this, process.
Great. I love seeing the common themes already arising amongst all of you on this. I want to talk now about prevention, and we're going to talk about treatment in a few minutes, but prevention, and in this you can take yourself out of your role. So you can talk about coaches, what coaches or ADs should do, or conferences, or parents, or the athletes themselves. But anything you want to share about preventing the problem from happening, and then we're going to roll into treatment, a similar question for treatment afterwards. But let's talk about prevention first. If you don't mind, Dr. Tom leading off, you're doing fine in that role. Why don't you go for it?
I've always wanted to be a leadoff batter. I had speed, so I could really round those bases. One big thing when it comes to prevention, I kind of want to address one of the questions in the chat, if we can. Someone asked a question about how do we manage the uncertainty of what's going on right now? Like, how can we really get at that? And one thing, when everything started happening, and to be honest, one of the teams I work with is BYU football, and we had almost our entire schedule canceled, right up front from COVID. And we were worried if there was even going to be a season. And as we started trying to get games, and in the national eyes, not great games, evidently, but as we started doing that, we started kind of really honing in on, hey, we're not going to control the schedule. What can we control? And when we talk about managing uncertainty and the ambiguity, and is there going to be a season, isn't there going to be a season? Well, I'd much rather be prepared for a season than to be surprised by a season. So I can control what I can. And if that's home workouts, if that's getting good grades so I'm eligible, if that's being ready for my opponents that we've thrown together with this schedule, then that's something that I need to focus on from a prevention standpoint. That will help with anxiety, that will help with mood. We don't control what the local restrictions are, or the county or the state restrictions are, but what can I do? And if we shift that question away from, wow, I'm really feeling screwed by the things I can't do, to, all right, what am I able to do in my sphere? Then we're starting to look at how we can engage life in a different way. And as a coach or as an administrator, helping those student athletes, or helping the individuals in that sport to kind of refocus in on those things is going to be a really important component of prevention in the next few months, as we're still kind of going through these things. Now, that's not an exhaustive list of prevention, but I think as far as addressing ambiguity and uncertainty, I think it's a really, really good starting point, and a coach is in a great position to be able to say, this is what we're going to control this week, or this is what we're going to control right now, because we don't know what next month is going to look like.
Right. Ivy, you want to talk a little bit about prevention?
Yeah, definitely. Tom, I love what you just said, because something I continuously remind myself, and that I like to share, is this notion of just living where your feet are, because we can't change the past. We can't change what COVID has taken away from us, and we can't control what's going to happen, in just 2 minutes, but we can be in this current moment. And I think that allows a lot of peace and calm into your life. I've been getting a question quite often about kind of will anxiety rates decrease like as we move forward. And you know, to think about kind of reducing anxiety, I think is difficult, because no matter what happens, there's going to always be outside stressors that come in our lives related to personal issues, athletics, academics, whatever it might be. And so I don't always necessarily think that will like reduce anxiety rates, but what I think we can do is really provide those tools a lot earlier on to people. So, you know, at young ages, I think there's an opportunity to be able to talk about mental health, to talk about self-care, to really give tools, to learn what meditation feels like and know that it can get frustrating, but to stay with the process, to know that getting help is okay, and here's how you can do that. I think that that is a really great way to intervene early, so that when those stressors do develop, student athletes already have those tools and what to do. But that doesn't always happen. And so thinking about like in the here and now, if you have a student athlete that you want to prevent from getting to a darker space, I actually got a private question in the chat box of what would I have wanted differently for myself as a student athlete. And I think one of the biggest things that I think my coaches could have done differently is to just have check-ins with me. I mean, we met every single week, but we were always just talking about why I wasn't running this perfect time, which was 54 seconds in the 400. We would watch film, and my coach would say, fix your form here, and drive out of the blocks, and all these things, technical issues. But we were never talking about what are you saying to yourself before the meet? What are you saying to yourself when you're in the blocks? What are you saying to yourself throughout the meet? And just like, how are you doing? Is there anything going on? There was never really that space. So I think there's a real great opportunity when you have either virtual meetings or in-person meetings with your student athletes to spend even just like 10 minutes in the beginning of a meeting to just have those check-ins and to say like, how are you doing? And I'm here for you if you ever want to talk about anything. And if it's not me, here's this resource that's really great that you can reach out to. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing also, we would have orientation meetings before every year, just to tell you about like, don't do drugs or alcohol, and here like some resources, but never really mental health resources. And so I think that there also was an opportunity there to have somebody come, whether that was an alumni or one of the counselors on campus, to say, this is what we do, and it's okay to struggle, or a past student athlete that said that they've struggled, just to let a student athlete like me know, who's sitting there, who feels so alone, feels like no one's going to understand, to know that I had that outlet. My coaches definitely cared about me. I just don't think that language was there. So I think it's important to know that you can check in and you can listen and you can be there, and that can make a huge difference, even if you don't always think that it is making a huge difference. One thing I like to do is I do like creative check-ins at the beginning of my meetings and presentations. So like battery cell percentage check-ins or color check-ins. And students have really liked those. So just being able to say by a number how I'm feeling, so from 0 to 100%. So that's like labeling that maybe I'm not okay, but I'm putting it out there as a way for me to start doing that self-reflection for you to know. And maybe it feels a little bit more comfortable than like, how are you doing? And it's just like, oh, like we're gonna do this check-in before we start any meeting. I also think like with a color check-in, you could have a couple of different colors. So like red, yellow, and green. And if they say they're red, that means that they're struggling. And maybe you have a fourth color, like purple. And if they choose purple as well, that means that they want to talk about it as well. So they're opening up that space to have that conversation. So I think there's creative ways that you can really implement mental wellness into really everything that you're doing with your student athletes. I think that that's a really great way for that prevention to happen, of just creating this space that student athletes know that you obviously care about them, but you care about their mental health, and you want them to know that you're there for them. So whether that's having those check-ins, or at the beginning of practice, spending 15 minutes stretching and talking about self-care, or spending a couple minutes doing positive affirmations or meditating together, you're really implementing these tools that maybe in the moment, the student athlete might say like, this is a joke, why are we doing this? But if it helps them feel even just 5% better, when they're back in their dorm rooms on their own and they're thinking, I'm struggling right now, what can I do? they can think, well, coach, had us meditate, or coach had us say this confidence building activity, and that was really helpful, even if it was just a little helpful. Maybe I can try that now. So I think there's just opportunities to take whatever creative mental wellness tool maybe feels good for you or that you've used in the past, and try to implement that in meetings and practices. And I think that would have made a huge difference for me to feel like I had someone that I could go to, not just about track issues, but about life issues.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes.
And add in, there are really good apps available now that help with mindfulness and self-tracking. And I like what Ivy is saying, like, hey, there's some skills that, hey, we did this in practice, but then reference that when they're on their own. I know I can't travel with every team. So when they're on the road, I'm like, hey, tap into this app and do these things and do these practices. It's going to help you. And there's a whole list of those, and we can probably link to a website that will drop those in. But just wanted to throw that out there real quick when Ivy brought it up.
Yeah. And I think that creativity and the follow-up and check-ins is important. I mean, let's face it, they are bombarded with great messages, but bombarded with them at the beginning of each year, really, with hazing and alcohol and sexual assault and gambling and compliance and all of these really important things. And the tendency can be just tune out. But if there's follow-up and if there's some creativity to it, the message can get across perhaps more effectively. I appreciate that. Adam, you want to talk a little bit about that prevention?
Yeah, definitely. First, I just wanted to quickly just piggyback off of Ivy's kind of creative check-ins and this idea of having these different colors or just different ways for them to express themselves early on. I like to use emojis and having them think about what emoji really describes their current feeling. And that is just another way, once again, to tap into this technology that they're already a part of their life every single day, a way for them to be able to, feel like they're describing their emotions in a way that's, once again, still preserving a little bit of that kind of safety for themselves. And so they can, once again, feel more secure in sharing maybe just, I guess, an image versus the whole story right off the bat. But I agree wholeheartedly with this idea of proactive support, really starting from the bottom to the bottom, really with the coaching staff. And, really it starts with education. So there is opportunities for even coaches and administrators and staff members to learn more about the importance of mental health and different just measures and approaches that can be taken, just to be able to, once again, open up a universal language. And so that now they're speaking the same language as maybe some of the resources that are potentially out there for them. And so that everyone's speaking on the same page, speaking the same language, and able to describe these same terms in the same way across the board. And I find that to be very critical because many descriptions can get lost in translation if we're not using the same terms or terminology. So I really try to have some sort of universal language right off the bat, some sort of glossary for them to be able to kind of access and use so that they can start to describe this even to another professional in a way that, once again, these information can be disseminated much more easily and clearly. So that's going to be something that I help my clients and my organizations figure out how to build in that universal language. And then the last thing is really this idea of promoting balance and rest and recovery. I know that a lot of us are this, really push, go, go, go mentality, trying to do the extra things to be able to give ourselves that competitive edge. But we have to understand, as much as we push, we also need to pull back. And so I know there's a lot of cultures out there that do not necessarily promote this balance, that promote this idea of rest and recovery. So this is a message that can be disseminated from the coaching staff that allows these athletes to have permission to be able to speak up and share when they're not feeling good or when their body is broken down and maybe they should take a day off and rest and recover mentally, emotionally, physically, to be able to then give themselves the best opportunity to push in the days to come. So to be able to understand that we need to be able to provide that space, that platform for these athletes to be able to feel comfortable being able to speak up and advocate for themselves and really understand that this is not easy because this is not the mentality that they've been raised as an athlete. We all, once again, as Tom mentioned, kind of like fighting through these different injuries and challenges and toughing it out. That's always been kind of the athlete motto. So to be able to help understand this idea of balance and pulling back and understanding that we do need to be proactive with that. And that's something that we always have in our control. We always have this idea of knowing how to be able to listen from within and to meet ourselves where we are. And that's not an easy concept for a lot of athletes to understand. So this is something that does need to be repeated and reinforced throughout the year, so that these athletes do feel comfortable going against maybe their current comfort level, which is to pull back when they've always known just to push forward. So that is something, once again, it's a part of this cultural piece, being able to make sure these are messages that are being regularly disseminated, so that once again, we create this level of comfort and really giving the athletes permission to take action for themselves.
Great, thank you, Adam. Dr. Eric, you want to add to that, and we're getting some great questions too. So we'll go into some questions after this as well as we also talk about treatment. But go ahead, Dr. Eric.
Yeah, let me just jump in briefly here. I think one of the things that's so important to keep in mind here is that the athlete, student athlete, professional athlete, whatever, is a part of a group. Probably the most beneficial aspect of all of this is that he or she is a member of this clan, this demographic that is involved in sports, cares about sports, and identity is tied up in sports. And we need to utilize that. You know, when we talk about COVID and this time that we're in now, one of the major things that we're battling is the isolation that COVID has inflicted on all of us. But the athlete, student athlete, has this built-in group that they can rely on, that they can interact with. The guys who I played ball with in high school and college, there are several of those guys who are still in my life. We still get together. We still talk 60 years later. And this is something that I think we kind of take for granted, but we need to utilize that dynamic. We need to have the athlete understand that they're not alone with the battles that they're having. That they have resources there, they have their teammates, they have their coaches, they're part of this large family. And that is a tremendous comfort for them, not only from the standpoint of fighting the isolation, but also as a source of resource for them. So I think it's really important that we emphasize for our athletes that they are a part of this group. They're not alone. They may feel that way from day to day, given what's going on in their lives, but that they need to be mindful of that larger group that they're a member of.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We got an interesting question, and I'll just throw it out to the group. Oh, go ahead, Dr.
Just one more thing about prevention, that it's based on kind of data. In that same survey that I referenced earlier, they also asked about sleep. And about 60% of student athletes are not getting enough sleep at night, which impacts anxiety and mood and recovery from workouts and injury. If we can actually get our student athletes to sleep a little better, a lot of problems can be reduced. I don't think they're going to go away, but your ability to cope with and manage those problems is going to increase. And so I think sleep is a big thing that coaches and athletic trainers and administrators can really advocate for and push for. They're not going to give up time with their dating partners. They're not going to give up time at sport. They may skip homework, but we hope they don't. But they are going to skip sleep. And so we've got to get the word out that sleep is really important for all of these issues.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you mentioned that. Absolutely. This is an interesting question, and I'll throw it out to the group if anybody has thoughts. So someone's asking if, sometimes the things that make an athlete really inspired and motivated are the world's against me and I'm getting screwed and this has happened to me and that's happened to me and I'm just going to take it out on my opponent. and so, you know, that toughness and this is going to motivate me, but those same factors might prevent them from the vulnerability off the field where they need to recognize, no, this is a problem for me, and I need to deal with this from a mental health standpoint. And I don't know if I did justice to that question that way, if that makes sense, but the notion of turning it on for the competition and then being able to turn it off and recognize, no, I really need help. It isn't sufficient just for me to try to take this out on the field. When there's avenues I really should be availing myself of, and it can be exacerbated. Sometimes you'll see a coach create that us against the world mindset, almost in a harm, like even the school's against us, the conference is against us because they scheduled us at 9 o'clock or whatever. Does anybody have thoughts on just balancing that and how to deal with that from a mental health standpoint?
Yeah, I think, sorry, Tom, I think you're about to go. I think that during this really tough but unique time, I think there's a real opportunity to kind of take some time to try out different self-care techniques and find out what feels good for you. Because I think, you want to be able to have that, mentality when you're out on the field and be able to compete and use some of that anger and frustration from your day and use that as fuel to compete. But you also want to be able to kind of walk away from that for a moment and then ask yourself, what can I do that's going to help me to feel better? And a lot of times I think that question isn't even really asked. We don't do that reflection enough. So I think during this time when things look so different, there's an opportunity to start thinking about what is it that works for me? Is it journaling? Is it talking to a friend? Is it watching a funny movie that just kind of makes me feel better? Taking a walk? What is my self-care technique that helps me to recenter myself, allows me to do that work that I can get back out on the field and then be my best self again, rather than continuously beating myself down after practice or after a game is over. So I think that's one thing to use this time to do, and to figure out what those tools are can be really helpful when thinking about that.
I alluded to this a little bit earlier, that there might be different tools in the toolbox that we have to use. And when we talk about being mindful in our context, just being present centered in our living, I liked how Ivy said this, just live where your feet are, right? When you're performing, that might mean a different thing than when you're not performing. For example, I work with athletes that may or may not get yelled at by their coach every once in a while, right? And it's somewhat deserved from a performance standpoint. And these are tough individuals, playing injured, play through pain, really fight and work hard in their sport. But then when they get yelled at by the coach, may check out for a quarter or may check out for the next 5 minutes, and they're essentially ineffective. We have to find a tool to kind of say, okay, look for the coaching point, kind of filter out some of how it's delivered. I hear a lot of coaches talk about that. Don't hear how I'm delivering it, hear what I'm saying. And you can develop that skill in a performance context. But let's say it's your dating partner now that's getting on you about something that's really bugging the relationship and really getting in the way. You can't use that same skill, or that relationship's going to end pretty quickly. So how some of it is context specific, and how I engage mindfully in school is going to be a little bit differently than how I engage mindfully in sport. But being aware of what I'm paying attention to, how I'm feeling, and some about where my body's activated, those are 3 really important skills that we can use in whatever context that is going to help. So there are things that are generalizable, but then it's about creating that self-awareness, as a few have mentioned here before, within the student athlete, okay, now is the time to engage these types of skills, and now is the time to engage these types of skills. So I don't know if coaches are going to be in the role to do that consistently, but being able to model that, from what I've seen, really successful coaches are able to have that gear where they're still coaching. And I wouldn't want you to change how you coach. I wouldn't want you to change how you administer your program, but also let them see how you use different sets of skills in those downtimes while you're traveling, in the team meetings that might be a little less structured. Let them see you use different tools, not just the one set of this is what they need to see from me all the time.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the coaches. We've talked a lot about connecting with the student athletes here and empowering them and advocating, getting them to advocate and all. But to what degree do you think coaches understand some of these issues? And I know that's painting with a very broad brush, but is there an education component in addition to the visibility for the athletes themselves? Is there an education visibility component for coaches that athletic departments should think about as well? In light of everything that's going on, and these issues and these issues might, by the way, get worse as new classes come in and seniors want to stay and roster sizes get squeezed even more and scholarships get squeezed even more.
I can go. I wasn't sure. It's hard to tell if people are trying to go or not. I 100% think that the coaches need education around mental health. I think we can talk about the student athletes, we can talk about educating them and getting and empowering them, but there's so many other areas. So they have their family members, they have their friends and their perceptions and their judgment, and then they have their coaches who, at the end of the day, like I know for me personally, like I put a lot of my self-worth into what my coach thought about me. I needed that external validation. I needed that pat on the back. And so that opinion, the opinion from a coach matters. And so I think it's really important that coaches have that education around recognizing what mental health problems look like and knowing that it can look different for everyone, and knowing that you need to check in and have those conversations with the student athletes who you might be able to tell are struggling, but also the ones who you think are your like star student athlete that doing everything right and you don't need to check in on, and they often might be the ones who are struggling the most behind their smile or behind, you know, their face mask that they have to wear for COVID or whatever it might be. I think it's important that coaches have that education around warning signs, how to have conversations with student athletes on mental health, and knowing that although it can be a scary conversation, if they're caring, compassionate, provide validation and just listen in those conversations. And as Tom mentioned, really practicing self-care for themselves and doing that and showing that can be a really great way for student athletes to feel less alone and to know that if their coach is doing something for their mental health, then it's okay for them to do it as well. So I absolutely think that coaches need to be looped into these conversations. And when we bring these conversations with education, we have to couple it with knowing that they have to take care of themselves as well. I think the education piece is incredibly important, but if we're just pouring that in and not recognizing that their mental health is incorporated into that as well, I think we lose a big piece. So we have to educate warning signs, how to have conversations, how to implement mentally wellness techniques into everything we do, and then also how to really have them take care of themselves and what that looks like for them as well. But coaches definitely play a huge role, as do parents, as do friends. And it's important for all of us to know, because I think as we all learn more about mental health, that's when the conversation becomes easier. That's when we can break the stigma. And that's when it becomes easy to say, hey, I'm going to see, Dr. Tom or Dr. Eric later on, like just as we say, I'm gonna go lift later on after class today, or saying that I'm struggling just as easily as we say, my back hurts today. The more and more that we become educated and have these conversations, the more that we're just gonna make that change, break that stigma, and empower more people to get help.
I think that's such an important point that you're making there, Ivy. I know for me, when I work with teams, that my mindset is to basically convince the coach that he or she is a sports psychologist themselves. That the most effective and the most important from a just a results-based perspective in coaching are those coaches who can be great with the X's and O's, but also are in effect unofficial sports psychologists whose mindset is focused on impacting their athletes' minds and psyches, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can teach fundamentals, you can teach execution, but you can also be responsive to your athlete's emotional well-being, what motivates him, what demotivates him, all of those things. And if you're going to be successful as a coach, you damn well better pay attention to the psychological part.
Right. Just want to add one. Oh, Adam, go ahead. I've talked enough.
No, I was just going to say.
No, not enough.
Thanks, Tom. No, but what I was just going to say was that, the coaches are on the front lines. They're seeing the athletes from day to day. They're noticing the subtle nuances in people's behaviors, in their interactions with different athletes, with other coaching staff. And these are warning signs or just indicators that things could be off. And that's where we can step in to be able just to check in, really provide that space, that outlet for these athletes to be able to share what's going on without that judgment, without that comparison to any other athlete, but recognizing that they're having a unique experience. And we want to be able to honor that by showing them that it's okay to feel this way, but we're going to actively work on this versus just brushing under the rug. And the thing is, what we can understand as coaches too, is that it's going to impact their performance. So we want them to perform at their best. We have to be at least monitoring what's going on from day to day so that we can expect what we can anticipate from them. So this is something that's really going to help you guys as coaches be able to get more consistency out of your clients, out of your athletes, by really just making sure that we're on the same page, that we're noticing these subtle nuances, because that's going to empower you to be able to help them make some sort of change in their life.
Thanks. Just one thing, one of the links I sent earlier is to the NCAA modules that will help train coaches. It's an interactive module. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes. We've had some success with our coaching staffs doing that together. They sit down in a room, get the training, and it kind of helps give exactly what Ivy was talking about, signs and symptoms, how you might approach someone. Here's how you talk about these issues out loud. They're really good resources, very professionally done, that are somewhat underutilized throughout all divisions in NCAA sports. So I think that that's a really good resource to kind of take a look at, that's available to you through the Sports Science Institute at the NCAA.
And Dr. Tom, I know there was a specific question about resources for sleep. Are you, if you want to drop that in the chat, or if you know of any, or Ivy, if you know of any, and again, I'll include it in the rundown of all of the items that all of the web links that I'll put on my LinkedIn page, and maybe we'll email it out as well, and we'll put it on the website. And by the way, so we go till 1:15. So I'm just going to ask each of you, just as for the last part here, what advice do you have for whether it's for the NCAA, whether it's for coaches, whether it's for your conference, in recognizing and addressing it, to the extent you want to add something to what you've already talked about, and then don't be shy about including your own social media links. I know a few of you are out for hire. I can vouch for Ivy being a tremendous speaker, of course, and Adam, I've seen what he does with teams, and Dr. Eric, your reputation precedes you, and Tom, maybe you could put a little plug in for BYU and the college football playoff. But anyhow, let's just go through, if you don't mind. Dr. Tom, you want to start?
Sure, and these are just resources available. I'm sorry, I was typing in the chat, trying to get that website. What am I doing exactly?
Oh, sure. If it's just advice, any advice for the NCAA, for conferences, for college athletics generally, to the extent you want to give them, or to parents or student athletes.
So I really appreciate how the conversation has shifted. It is much more visible. Professional athletes are doing this and taking some lead there as well. They're coming out and saying, hey, pay attention to this. I think one of the big things from the NBA bubble was I didn't know the mental health toll that would take to be there, away from my family, away from really everyone except at practice and at games. That was tough. And we're seeing it. One thing that I think conferences and institutions can do is just make it a priority. It's part of health. It's part of wellness. It's just as real as ACLs. It's just as real as back injuries and neck injuries. It can be just as debilitating. And if we dedicate adequate time and resource to it, which I know is hard and that's limited to everyone, but keeping it on the forefront is going to enable the student athletes. Know the people in your area. If you don't have someone on your staff, let's find people. And if you want help trying to find that, I'm connected in some ways to some areas. I'll help you find those resources. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm available for consultations, happy to take a call. I'm a little less good at email because I get too many of those these days, but happy to talk through some of these things.
Dr. Tom, thanks so much. Appreciate it. My friends in the WCC raved about you, and I can see why. So thanks for being part of this today and for leading off so adeptly. Ivy, do you want to give any parting comments, advice?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just for everyone to hold on to hope and know that this is a tough time, but it definitely will build in strength and resiliency and come out on the other side. And I think when we can start believing that for ourselves, we can pass that message down to student athletes. And if we are a student athlete, just recognizing that you're not alone in this journey, and that you have supports. It might not feel like you have many supports on campus in terms of like clinical help all the time, but there are people in your corner who want to help you, and that might be a coach, a teammate, a parent, a long lost cousin, or all these people on the panel, as well as myself. As Tom said, I'm available for questions at any time. I put my contact in the chat box, so please do feel free to reach out about anything. I'm always here as well. So don't give up hope. And if we were on a presentation right now, we'd be saying, I am worthy, I am capable, I am good enough. So always remember that.
Thank you, Ivy. You're an ECAC Hall of Famer, and you'll be on all our panels going forward. Again, Adam, you want some parting advice or comments?
Definitely. So I think just that it starts with you is definitely something we need to understand, that wherever you are in this process of helping student athletes, being able to practice compassion, not just only for others, but for yourself. We're all going through this unique situation. This is not easy for any of us to manage, these highs and lows that we're facing from day to day. And so to be able to, first of all, meet ourselves with that level of compassion that we would provide for anyone else, we need to provide that for ourselves and really make sure that we're meeting ourselves in a positive space, even when we're in the midst of challenge. And just like what Dr. Tom mentioned, we may not be able to see what's going on the surface with these athletes. So but it's just as real. And so to be able to understand that, being able to be compassionate with things that we don't even understand fully. And so we may not understand the student athlete's plight, but we can understand that when someone's off and someone's not feeling like themselves, it doesn't make us feel good as a coach or as a resource. So to be able to help them can also ultimately help you feel better about yourself and what you can do to really help promote, stronger mental skills and really that emotional stability that's going to allow all of us to be able to overcome these current challenges that we're facing.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Great seeing your face again and hearing your voice. And I'm so pleased with all your success. Continued good luck to you, my friend. And Dr. Eric, what advice or thoughts do you have?
Well, I guess my parting thought would be that, as we've all been focusing on, these are very unusual times. But we're all different. We all have different capacities for empathy. We have different capacities for connecting with people. Some of us are more loners and to ourselves. Others are more outgoing. We need to all, in this time, be able to reach out within our own capacity. We're not going to change who we are as people. We're not going to change our basic personality, but we can, to borrow a phrase, be mindful of what we're going through now, and try and encourage people to stretch out and be a little more than who they normally are, so to speak. And I think that, if we all do that together, we're going to get through this thing for better or worse anyway, but we'll get through it better if we all take that extra step and reach out to a neighbor, to our student, to our professor, to whoever, because we've never seen anything like this. And maybe never for some of us, but if we all pull together, we're going to get through it, and we need to respect each other's differences, but also utilize others' similarities.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Dr. Eric, for helping us out today. I can't thank the four of you enough. I think this has been fascinating for me, and I hope it was for our participants. Thanks to everyone who was watching. We may do others. We've done a number before this, and we're contemplating doing just a student athlete panel on this issue. So that might be the next one perhaps we do. But stay connected with us on LinkedIn or social media to see about that. But thank you so much, everybody. Thanks again, panelists. Great job. Great job. Appreciate it. And Dave Toromeo with the Sports Business Institute, thank you very much as well. CSMG, Kelly Klein, putting all this together. Fantastic job.
Thanks for having me.